Hi there, and welcome to Israel Explained Sinwar is Finally Dead edition. So, as I'm sure you all know, Yehya Sinwar, the man who planned and was responsible for overseeing the carrying out of the October 7th slaughter of Israeli civilians and soldiers, is now dead. And there will be people who will try to find a bad side to the fact that he is dead. But the truth is, this is a remarkably positive development. Not only is it remarkably positive in terms of justice, in terms of deterrence, in terms of just wanting to get revenge for one of the worst things that's ever happened to the Jewish people, it's also something that has a lot of strategic upside, which is sort of what we do in this um, podcast and these videos. That's kind of my wheelhouse. So let's talk a little bit about how Sinwar died first. So as we know, Israel's been carrying out a lot of high-profile assassinations, using a lot of intelligence, and all those sorts of things. And that was not the case this time. On some level, this was just dumb luck, and Israeli soldiers ran into Sinwar accidentally. But as we'll see, it's not that simple. There was information, insistent information from the Shabak in particular, that Sinwar was in that area. And the operations there, while there wasn't necessarily a lot of optimism that it would succeed, one of the main missions of the forces in the area was to try to locate and kill Sinwar. So what happened? Um, the IDF forces were operating in Rafah, routine operations. They ran into three figures they quickly identified as terrorists. They were masked, they had blankets, so they'd been sleeping out in the area. There were three of them. Two ran in the direction of one building once the IDF had initiated contact with them, and one to another. The one was Sinwar, we now know. They had no idea at the time. He ran up to the second floor of a building. Instead of chasing him into the building, the infantry forces there, some of which were in a squad leader force when they were operating, ordered a strike on the building from a Merkava 4 tank that was in the vicinity. And also, an infantry member used a Matador anti tank missile at the building, hit killed Sinwar in there. The soldiers went in to find the suspect and were immediately struck by how much the individual looked like Sinwar. And so the question was, is this the person? Um, his finger was cut off and taken to examine whether it fit the fingerprints of Sinwar. Of course, Sinwar had spent time in Israel, and they did. So after a few hours, they had a positive identification that it was Sinwar and he was dead. Now, on an Israeli sort of military level, social level, it's important to note that the people who killed Sinwar, who was the biggest target of the entire war, were regular infantry units. That's important because usually the folks who get all the glory are the pilots, the members of the commando forces, the intelligence. This was just regular infantry grunts who now have a story for a lifetime and will be heroes for a lifetime. And that's kind of heartwarming. These are the types of guys from the reserves who do the thankless work time after time. The soldiers who were involved directly in killing him said that this was their fourth tour, and this makes everything worth it. So I'm very glad that it was those people that got it and not the usual people who always get all the glory. Sinwar had about $10,000 on him, so 40,000 shekels, mint mentos on him, which seemed to have come from the aid supplied into Gaza. I've always preferred the fruit mentos, and now I feel vindicated, as well as a Glock handgun taken from an IDF soldier who was killed in action in 2018 that Sinwar is said to have treasured very much. Um, Now, you may have heard um, that Sinwar had a group of hostages. What was often in the news a few months ago was that Sinwar had a group of 20 hostages and they followed him everywhere in the tunnels, and that they were the reason that he was alive. So I've been trying to figure out if that intelligence was faulty or if circumstances had changed. It looks like circumstances had changed. I don't know if the 20 hostages um, element was correct, but what we do know is that the six hostages that were recently murdered, including Hirsch, Poland Goldberg, were kept near Sinwar. And after there was a rescue of an Israeli Arab from nearby, he decided to abandon them because they were not in very good health anymore. And then when the IDF got close to them, their assassination was ordered. So basically, Sinwar had been flushed out of the tunnels by persistent IDF operations. The operation they call popcorn. Why popcorn? Because the point is to get him to pop up like popcorn does from underground. So raids into tunnels, destruction of tunnels, all that made them unsafe for him, and he started operating from the ground, and he no longer felt like he could carry hostages around with him. So all that pressure made it possible to assassinate him. Up until recently, he was not in Rafah. He was in Khan Yunis, but it looks like he's been in Rafah over the last 2 months. Now, um, the real question that arises now is how does this affect the larger picture? How does this affect Hamas's ability to continue to fight? And how does this affect the likelihood of a hostage deal? So, in terms of the Hamas ability to fight, this is a real crushing blow because, as we know, several of the Hamas battalions have been destroyed by Israel. A lot of their commanders had been destroyed. A lot of the infrastructure had been destroyed. So it had become a very diffuse organization without a clear top to bottom structure. One of the things that was holding them together was the charismatic presence of the leader. And Sinwar was considered a great leader by Hamas because not only had he planned the operation that was so successful, but also he stayed and fought in the trenches with them, wouldn't give an inch. And unlike other Hamas leaders, wasn't living in some six-star hotel in Qatar or anything like that. He really practiced what he preached. And he also was a very good strategist and managed to handle a lot of different elements. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So losing him, especially when you have an organization where the structure um, is organized and diffuse, losing the charismatic figure that holds things together is devastating. As far as the negotiations go, it's a little more complicated, but the news is also generally good. Sinwar was the only negotiator, and that means that the current that you need to replace him with another negotiator. That causes a delay, at least in theory. But it doesn't really look like Sinwar wanted a deal all that much, so I'm not sure that that delay actually actually matters. The fact that it weakens Hamas lowers their bargaining ability, but it also creates new opportunities. Um, the Israelis I talked to and people I saw talking in the news and so on and so forth all agree it's time for more aggressive initiatives alongside military pressure. This is not instead of military pressure towards hostage deal. They don't necessarily agree on how. There's at least two approaches to how you can do this that are being discussed. One is to continue talking directly with Hamas, locate the new leadership, talk to them. That could be useful now because there's no question that with Sinwar gone, Hamas Gaza will be less powerful, and Hamas Doha in Qatar will be more powerful. What exactly the balance of power will be is unclear. but there's definitely going to be a strengthening for Hamas Doha now that the most significant figure in Hamas Gaza is gone. That's just a given. That means Hamas is open to a lot more pressure from Iran and from Qatar and Egypt, and therefore indirectly from the United States through the talks. That's very good news. Another option that people are talking about is the ability to pick off different actors that are holding hostages and negotiate with them directly. Netanyahu, in his speech, offered amnesty to people who would give up hostages, to people who give up information on hostages. There's also going to be talks in the cabinet over the next few days of the possibility of talking to the PIJ, talking to different clans, perhaps talking to different cells in Hamas separately to give them something in exchange for returning the hostages. So those two options are being weighed. Maybe they can go fit together. What's for sure is that this opens up new opportunities. And um, right now, Hamas is in shock. Members of the organization in Gaza, I'm hearing, are refusing to even believe that this happened. But there will be a replacement. Nature abhors vacuum. Who will be the replacement? In Gaza, we know almost for sure it's going to be Muhammad Sinwar who is going to take over. He has a lot of the same credibility that his brother had in terms that he's been there, he's been fighting, he's been planning. He doesn't have the same charisma and he doesn't have the same strategic mind. And therefore, it's likely that if he takes over, and he's likely to take over, he won't be quite as powerful as his brother was. Now, in terms of Hamas outside of Gaza, there's several figures who could take over. The most powerful traditionally is Khalid Mashal, who is believed to be the one who would take over after the assassination of Hania, and instead it was Sinwar. It's worth watching it if Mashal gets it, because one of the reasons Mashal hasn't been a leader is because his opinions are controversial. Mashal believes that Hamas has gotten too close to Iran and the Iranian axis and wants to pull it towards the Sunnis. That would mean a revolution in their approach, in their funding sources. It would open new opportunities, but a lot of dangers for them. That would be a real change. So it's worth watching if Khalid Mashal finally gets the chance to lead Hamas. He could lead them in a completely different direction. Now, I said that this is good, and it is good, but there could be nasty fallout. Um, since we're talking about a sort of disintegration in the Hamas top to bottom structure, and there's a lot of anger about the assassination of Sinwar, there's always the chance that rogue elements, or maybe even not rogue elements, maybe even under commands, will take it out on the hostages. That's something we need to be prepared for. However, if they kill all the hostages, as we know, they're going to lose their leverage, and that's incredibly problematic for them. So Netanyahu said, quote, I call on everyone who holds our hostages, whoever lays down his arms and returns our hostages, we will allow him to leave and live. Whoever harms our hostages, there will be blood on his head, and we will hold him accountable. The return of our hostages is an opportunity to achieve all our goals, and it brings the end of the war closer. Now, what he didn't say is he didn't say that Israel will now put more focus on a hostage deal. And that's important. So the basic structural things preventing a deal are still there. Sinwar was an important blocking point because he believed the war was moving in Hamas's direction. But the main blocks are still there. Hamas is still going to insist that Israel withdraw from Gaza and end the war for there to be a ceasefire. That's not going to change. They might fight less hard for it. We'll see. Meanwhile, a ceasefire remains unacceptable to both Ben Gvir and Smotrich. So we still have the problem that Netanyahu's government might fall if there's a hostage deal, and that Hamas will want Israel to withdraw. Of course, Israel now has Sinwar's body as a bargaining chip, and that matters to Hamas, but we'll see how much that matters. Now, one of the major reasons that Sinwar's loss is so significant is because he had a keen strategic mind. And that came from the understanding of Israeli society on a deep level. Remember, Sinwar spent years in prison in Israel, learned Hebrew, and avidly followed Israeli news, Israeli culture. And that's why he constantly tried to split Israel. And he saw a lot of the issues surrounding judicial reform and the split in the country as a weakening. He said in an interview many years ago in Hebrew that he would be waiting to see weakening in Israeli society before attacking it. And that seems to have been what he did. He also had a keen understanding of the international environment, looking at the protests abroad, looking at the ICJ, the ICC, countries that were considering embargoing Israel with weapons. He was always looking for the ability to isolate Israel internationally. And a lot of what Hamas has done has been um, trying to move to that direction, which Hamas always saw as more effective than their arms in destroying Israel. And of course, as we know, they've made incredible progress in isolating Israel and in helping divide Israeli society. So Sinwar saw that a lot of those goals were coming to fruition. And that's one of the reasons he didn't want a ceasefire deal. And now that he's gone, it's not clear if anyone will have the patience, forbearance, and strategic vision to want to keep pushing and destroy Israel. We'll see if anyone can continue that goal. Hopefully for Israel, no one will, because it's caused Israel incredible damage. Um, this brings Iran into the picture more than ever before regarding Hamas for two reasons. Reason number one is Sinwar, while he appreciated Iranian support, did not listen to Iran. He didn't listen to anyone. He only listened to himself. He was his own leader. There was very little leverage that Iran had over him, Qatar had over him. They tried to convince him of things. They negotiated with him. He didn't really listen. Anyone else who's going to run Hamas now, aside from Khalid Mashal, who's his own special case, would be more open to Iranian pressure. And Iran are now much more interested in what's happening because they're finding right now, thanks to Israeli escalation, that the war is really threatening their hold on the region. Their proxies in Hezbollah are under serious threat. Now Hamas is under serious threat. There's increasing chance of Israel retaliating against them in ways that are very harmful. Not right now, probably, but after the elections, maybe the oil, nuclear sites, all those sorts of things. So Iran has more of an interest in stopping this, and Iran now has more leverage over Hamas than ever did before. And Hamas Qatar will now be more powerful, as we said, and that leaves them open to um, a lot of pressure. So Giora Island, the former Israeli general, speaking, and he said that this is a very good chance to start talking to Iran rather than attacking them indirectly, of course, talking to them in order to get them to pressure the Hezbollah and Hamas into a ceasefire, return of the hostages, because right now Israel has more leverage and more strength than it had before. And that is a very good idea, in my opinion. You have to take these achievements that Israel has, tie them into a strategy, tie them into a solution, because if this war turns into a war of attrition over several years, we're going to see that Israel's position is going to get worse and worse due to international pressure, due to splits in Israeli society. Assassinations are not a substitute for diplomatic and political achievements. And so this is very important what happened because this is actually the first time that Israel has achieved one of its war aims. Its war aims are to remove Hamas from Gaza, which I've always seen as the most important one, the return of hostages, the elimination of Sinwar, and they've added a fourth one, which is the return of Israeli citizens to their homes in the north. In the south, most have already returned, in the north, safely. So Israel has finally achieved one of those goals. That's not enough to win the war, but it's certainly a lot better than achieving none. And that's one of the reasons that maybe Netanyahu has a little bit more leverage to make concessions as well. He can now say, I had an achievement. I killed Sinwar. He can also say, I killed Nasrallah. Of course, Nasrallah wasn't one of the original war aims, but also an incredible achievement for the IDF. At the end of the day, Netanyahu won't be able to end the war until he can face Israeli people and say, look, I won. And this brings him that step closer. And it does. It is a great achievement. Hamas is definitely on the back foot. Hamas should be pushed now because they could be on the verge of collapse. Of course, that means we still need Israel to replace them in Gaza. Otherwise, it can't win. Okay, so I just did a video yesterday, so I didn't have a lot of questions. Got some nice comments from you folks. I did get one question from Floodland. Will the Saudis let Israel fly through their airspace to bomb Iran? Of course, the short answer to that is I don't know. But there's been a lot of pressure that Iran has put on its neighbors not to allow Israel to fly, including threats of attack. My guess is Israel will not get the approval from any country of flying over. But no one will shoot down their planes either, at least not very actively. So Israel will have to go through covertly. They will probably see something in between where no one's going to like allow them to fly through. Maybe there'll even be a symbolic attempt to shoot down a plane. But I don't think there'll be anything serious because ultimately it's not in the interests of Saudi Arabia to shoot down Israeli planes that are trying to hit Iran because that strengthens Iran's hold on the region. So we might see some symbolic protest, some symbolic shooting of anti-air, or Israel just manages to fool them and get through them. I don't think it's a big issue, but I don't think anyone's going to actually allow Israel to fly through, especially if it's a massive attack involving the nuclear system or the oil fields. Okay, that's the end of this special episode on Sinwar's assassination. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media. I will soon be releasing that new episode, History of the Land of Israel podcast. And I will see you here again next time something interesting happens, which seems to happen very often in the Middle East.